Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Stephanie Kelley-Romano, an associate professor and chair of the Department of Rhetoric, Film, and Screen Studies. My partner in convocating today is Dr. Charles Nero, the Benjamin E. Mays Distinguished Professor in Rhetoric, Film, and Screen Studies and Africana. Today, we will jointly address you and invite you into our convocation conversation. We want to begin by thanking the class of 2020 for inviting us to give this address. It is really an honor. And we also want to thank and welcome the class of 2024 and all of our students, faculty, staff, and community members who are here. It's been a year so far for sure. And we want to recognize the thoughtfulness and thoroughness of the plan of action that this community has mobilized in order to bring us together, both in person and virtually. Nothing in this world is perfect, but we are very proud to be part of an institution that continually critiques and strives to perfect itself. We're excited to welcome the class of 2024 into that process and into our community. Your experiences, ideas, and definitely enthusiasm are needed. So this address, like this year, has no real precedent. We are boldly going where no man, woman, or non-gender specific individual has gone before. Although uncertainty can be scary, the lack of limitations, the breadth of possibility can also be exhilarating. As we encounter challenges, which we invariably will, we necessarily must be nimble. We must pivot, if you will. Now, the word pivot has several meanings. As a verb, pivot means to turn on or around a central point. Often we use pivot in a colloquial way with the meaning of a change of direction in policy or procedure. This colloquial definition usually has adeptness or adroitness as part of its connotations. So today, Charles and I want to share with you the stories of our individual journeys, our personal pivots, to demonstrate the ways that collaboration, trust, and learning can create useful and satisfying lives. In so doing, we would also like to encourage you to think about your own positionality and your pivoting possibilities.
Education has been one of the main points about which my life pivots. Although I was a theater major as an undergrad, I pursued graduate work in speech communication for its hopeful emphasis on the role of language and the performance of it in a democratic state. Speech communication, specifically rhetoric and public address, appealed to me because I came of age in the American South as the civil rights and Black Power movements transformed the meaning of citizenship for African Americans. It allowed, laws were passed that affirmed my people's right to access the American dream. I really believed that my graduate education would help me to participate and contribute productively to the stories and histories about my people and what we do and have done for our nation. However, I came to understand that my chosen discipline was fundamentally enmeshed in the politics of white redemption that pivoted on white supremacy, the denial of slavery as a cause of the Civil War, and the belief in African American inferiority. In graduate school, I realized how deeply implicated speech communication's stakes were in white supremacy and anti-Blackness, as it metaphorically slapped me in the face every semester. A leading professor in American public address and oratory asked me one time, "Why are you interested in writing about Blacks? Hasn't everything been written about them?" Another professor discouraged me from writing about African Americans in 20th century progressive politics because he was only encouraging, I quote, his graduate students to write about people who were mainstream and central. In another course on British public address, silence was the norm for the abolition of slavery movement that changed the course of our world by ending the traffic in human bodies that produced the wealth that created modern capitalism. My experiences inside the classroom reflected the discipline at large. To succeed, I had to demonstrate mastery of the discipline's canonical text that made little to no mention of African Americans, of women, indigenous peoples, queer people, or any other people of color in US history and culture. I pivoted away from speech communication to African American studies, and especially toward literary and film studies. I embraced Audre Lorde's famous pronouncement that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. At Bates, I learned new skills. I retooled myself in new theories and in new pedagogies. I never left speech communication completely behind because I believed, and I still do, that language and its performance are crucial for a democracy. However, I believe as well that democracy requires a commitment to social justice that strives to be inclusive and equitable. The majors I have been most involved in here at Bates, Africana and Rhetoric, Film and Screen Studies, emphasize social justice as crucial components for an undergraduate education.
My experience in academia is similar but different. As a first-gener, college seemed like a magical place, and I was an unlikely inhabitant of said space. In high school, my guidance counselor had told me that I wasn't college material. Primarily, I think now that was because my family did not have the economic means of most of my classmates. So my academic journey began in community college. And like Charles, I did a lot of pivoting. I pivoted from an art major to studying law to communication studies. I made myself dizzy pivoting between loving lip gloss and all things pink and absolutely hating the mass-mediated messages about what I should be and what I should want as a woman. So I had a lot of shame as I came to understand the world and my place in it. And I think it's important to speak about it because much of my shame was about the performance of my identity, which was under constant scrutiny by multiple audiences. And for the life of me, I could not get it right. I internalized and individualized systemic inequalities and experienced them as individual inadequacies. Maya Angelou has a quote where she says, "We do the best we can with what we know. And when we know better, we do better." But at that point, I didn't know what I didn't know. Dissatisfaction with the status quo, dissatisfaction with being treated differently became individualized guilt and shame. But then in graduate school, I came to understand the framing power of language. Rhetoric prompted me to pivot my attention in order to critique not only the consequences of calling someone a survivor versus a victim, but also the larger systems and their entrenched histories that put the onus on girls to not distract boys with their tight clothing or to act like ladies or to just accept that boys will be boys. As a person in recovery, I would cringe when watching the invariably oversimplified depictions of alcoholism and addiction on television and in film. Over the years, I've watched and I continue to track the way that the language reframes addiction. So we've moved from addiction and alcoholism being a moral weakness to a chemical dependency, to now we talk about a person with substance misuse disorder. Each iteration of the naming and reframing of this redefines the agent and attempts to destigmatize addiction. Pivoting between text and context, between exigence and audience, has made me a better scholar, teacher, and citizen. So now here we are, here you are, class of 2024, just beginning the journey that Charles and I began so long ago. And as rhetoric professors, we're very well versed in the conventions and expectations of speech situations and of this speech situation. We're supposed to welcome you into the Bates community. We're supposed to encourage you in your intellectual curiosity and offer you some advice. And we're supposed to affirm that you are indeed wonderful.
But these are not conventional times. We are in the midst of a global pandemic that has raised issues about equity, work, safety, and freedom. We are witnessing a pandemic that has taken the lives disproportionately of people of color, people in service work, people in communities of color, indigenous peoples on their homelands, immigrants, and people who do not live in single-family nuclear unit homes. We are witnessing the mobilization of anti-racist protests across the country and the world in response to the continued brutality and murder of Black Americans. We are also witnessing worldwide an unprecedented struggle for democratic institutions and norms. For many of you, it will be the first time grappling with issues of social justice and intersectional sites of power. For others, social justice issues will be something you have dealt with all of your life. And for many of you, you will be participating in your very first US presidential election virtually. You've come of age in a time of alternative facts and are living in a time of cancel culture, call-out culture, and conspiracy theories. It's a lot. It's easy to be overwhelmed. It's tempting to distract and distance ourselves from the uncomfortableness that growth and change require. But we can't. You can't. You've earned the opportunity to come to Bates and the chance to let it change you.
A liberal arts education is grounded in the belief that breadth of knowledge and cultivation of curiosity and creativity prepares people best for civic life. The liberal arts education you receive at Bates will enable you to navigate these pressing questions raised in our culture and equip you with the tools to make critical judgments. So we have some advice. And our first bit of advice is to get out of your comfort zone. As a department, we chose to pivot away from an exclusive focus on mainstream white public address in order to amplify the marginalized and ignored voices of history. In so doing, we moved from description of speeches and strategies and styles to critiques of the systemic powers that perpetuate injustice. You too, as individuals, need to get out of your comfort zone. Yes, we know you love all things geo, or you are absolutely set on going to law school, or you need to dance in order to feel alive. We understand that, but there are experiences that you need to have and things to learn all around you. Don't let your focus be so narrow that you miss the beauty of a broader perspective. Seriously, sign up for something that you would never do. Ask a friend if you can tag along to a lecture. Ask an upper class student some of the things that they've liked to do. And do one of the things that sounds interesting, and do one of the things that makes you feel some other kind of way. Be open to the experience.
Being open leads us to our second piece of advice. Don't be afraid to get messy. 20 years ago, as we were redesigning our curriculum, we knew we wanted some sort of classical, pop culture, social justice mashup, and it was messy until we realized and recognized the centrality of power as the pivot point of our research and our teaching. Messiness is the beginning of what the late Congressman John Lewis called good trouble. We know you have been taught how to write the best 5-paragraph essay ever. We know you can recite facts. You can follow formulas. But now we want you to follow your heart informed by your head to create new ways of thinking and being in the world.
Our third piece of advice is to be patient with yourself and to be patient with each other. Be humble enough to know that you might not know everything. And guess what? Neither do your professors. I know that when I started at Bates, like Maya Angelou noted, I didn't know what I didn't know. And the people here, my colleagues, were incredibly kind. And they would simply suggest things that I might want to think about or drop off a book in my mailbox that I might want to look at. We are all in this together, in this messy act of co-creation of knowledge and self-emancipation. Approach experiences with a willingness to learn. Don't listen to respond, listen to hear. Call out ideas, but be kind to people. We're all going to make mistakes. Be courageous in your convictions, but don't be closed to new ideas. Fundamental to the actual enactment of all of these principles is the continued practice of learning. So keep reading, think about those sources, evaluate the evidence, research some more, ask some questions.
Seek balance, don't burn out.
Think big, but act incrementally. Pace yourself.
Find your vibe.
Build bridges, not walls.
Stephanie, I'd like to end my section of our conversation by sharing one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, one of the most distinguished graduates of Bates College. Dr. Mays said, "The tragedy of life doesn't lie in not reaching your goal. The tragedy lies in having no goal to reach. It isn't a calamity to die with dreams unfulfilled, but it is a calamity not to dream. It is not a disgrace not to reach the stars, but it is a disgrace to have no stars to reach for. Not failure, but low aim is sin."
Well, Charles, I too will end with a quote. In commemoration of the anniversary of the 19th Amendment, I will offer you all a quote from Carrie Chapman Catt. And I offer this to the class of 2024 and all of our community members as a little bit of advice. To the wrongs that need resistance, to the right that needs assistance, to the future in the distance, give yourselves. Class of 2024, welcome to Bates.
Now go get busy.